Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Karen Bender with Whole Health Wellness Center. Welcome to this evening's webinar, Your Brain at Its Best. We're going to talk about brain health personalized. We're going to go ahead and get started. While we're going along, feel free to ask any questions in the chat, and I will try to answer them as we go or get to them at the end. So I'll go ahead and get started. What we're going to talk about this evening is, first of all, we're just going to talk about the importance of the brain and the gut connection and some things that we can do to improve that connection, as well as some nutrition and lifestyle interventions to improve gut and brain health. I'm also going to talk about some other individualized recommendations for brain health based on your particular brain type. And then talk about some diagnostic testing that I do with people to help optimize their brain and gut health at Whole Health Wellness Center. And then you'll be given an opportunity to book a free discovery call where you can ask any questions that you have about naturopathic medicine and if it might be right for you. All right, so first off, I want to talk about the vagus nerve. It is a cranial nerve, which means it originates in the brain, but then it innervates various organs in the body, including the heart, the lungs, and the intestines. So it has a lot of different roles in the body, and it's actually the longest nerve in the body, and it gets its name vagus, for Latin for the wanderer, because it does have so many places in the body that it goes. But in the digestive system specifically, it does both send and receive information to and from the brain. So the brain is sending information to the digestive system about making sure it's producing enough digestive enzymes and stomach acid for digestion to be optimal. And then it's also sending messages back from the digestive system to the brain about satiety or feeling of fullness, and also kind of regulating energy metabolism. So low tone or function of the vagus nerve can happen through a variety of different ways: psychological stress, as well as physical stress from inflammation, chronic inflammation, infections. Um, Things of this nature can cause the vagus nerve to be not working as well as it could. And it's been dysfunction of the nerve has many implications, including heart heart rate, blood pressure regulation difficulties. But and when it comes to the understanding its relationship to the brain, it can also be correlated with depression and PTSD. So I want to talk about some ways that you can really help to improve the functioning of your vagus nerve. Oh, you can't hear me? I'm not sure if anybody else can't hear me, but I'll just wait for a second to see. Oh, okay. So I'm going to keep going. So some ways that you can improve the vagus nerve again would be, my number one way is diaphragmatic breathing. And so the reason why I like this one so much is that it's very accessible and you always have it with you. Your breath is something you always have with you, and it doesn't take very long to really shift your nervous system into the rest and restore mode. Many of us run around in the sympathetic nervous system, engaged in the sympathetic nervous system for a lot of the time without even necessarily realizing it. So by doing diaphragmatic breathing, you can really help to shift that, and it also really helps the functioning of the vagus nerve. So what I mean by that is breathing from your diaphragm, or deep belly breathing. Your diaphragm is a muscle that goes across your abdomen. It's actually kind of shaped like an umbrella. It goes down in front of your abdomen and is also in the back, and then it kind of goes down the side. But it's our largest breathing muscle that we often don't actually even use. But with practice, it can get stronger and become more natural. to do. So when you're first learning how to do diaphragmatic breathing, I recommend that you put a hand on your chest and one on your stomach so that you can sort of really be in tune with where you're breathing. Most people breathe from up here in their chest just as a natural, it can be a habit, oftentimes from poor posture, like if we're sitting with our shoulders in on the keyboard, things like that all day long, we tend to sort of use we use our chest to breathe, and it's very shallow breathing. Where if we use our diaphragm, we get much better oxygenation. It's better for the vagus nerve, and it also helps to shift ourselves into that parasympathetic. The breathing exercise that I recommend people do is called the 4-6-8 breath. And you breathe in through your nose for a count of 4. You hold it for about a count of 6, and then you exhale for a count of 8. And you want to have the exhale be longer than the inhale. That is the most crucial part, because that is what really communicates to your nervous system that you can shift into that rest and restore mode, or the parasympathetic mode. And I recommend people do it at least 4 to 8 cycles twice a day, just as a practice of tonifying your vagus nerve, becoming more aware of how you're breathing, and shifting it can be a really powerful tool that can make a really big difference in your gut and brain health. And then also just using it whenever you start to feel you're nervous, stressed, overwhelmed, anything like that, it can really help to calm the nervous system as well. So it's my number one thing I recommend people do on a regular basis. Meditation is also a great one. There's a little bit more of a learning curve with that one for some people. Not as accessible. Sometimes it can be harder to find the time for that, whereas the breathing exercise literally takes 30 seconds or to do. So it's not as big of an obstacle for people to do it. But once you're really comfortable with the breathing exercises, then it's really great to move and expand into doing meditation, because that's just another way of improving your vagus nerve tone and your brain health. Other one is singing or humming. It has to do with the fact that the vagus nerve also innervates the vocal cords. So, singing is stress relieving. It usually requires diaphragmatic breathing, deep breathing. So it's kind of 2 for 1. It's a really nice thing to do to help with that as well. And then the other one I have listed here is biofeedback, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. So biofeedback is just a term that generally speaks to any kind of technology that is used to help us be more in touch with our body, our physiology, and how our brain or our thoughts can kind of affect that. So the one that I use is called HeartMath, and basically what it does is you have a sensor that you put on your ear that measures your heart rate variability. And so as you can see in this picture, your heart rate does not stay the same. It kind of goes up and down even from moment to moment. But heart rate variability, when it's nice and even, like the picture shows more on the right, is associated with feelings of appreciation, gratitude, calmness, and is helpful for peak performance, for athletes, better concentration, and a sense of well-being. So you can actually practice shifting yourself into these different states with the use of the biofeedback that just lets you know when you're in the various states, so that you know what it feels like, so you can try practicing being in that state more often. And that's something that I can do in the office with people when they're interested in. All right, now I'm going to kind of shift gears and talk about the microbes in the microbiome and how that affects the brain. So the microbiome just refers to all the microbes that live in our bodies, like in the lungs, in the nasal passages, in the gut, on the skin. But primarily I'm focusing more like on the microbes that are in the large intestine for this particular conversation, but they are also on all those other places that I just mentioned. So first off, they do affect neurotransmitters. So the gut actually produces 90% of the serotonin. a lot of that serotonin is used in the digestive system itself, but it also is used in the brain. It also produces a neurotransmitter called GABA that is a calming neurotransmitter. It helps us with regulating fear response, controlling anxiety. And it's been found in research that certain bacteria, specifically Lactobacillus rhamnosus, in the microbiome helps to produce that GABA. And so if we don't have a balanced microbiome, if we don't have the diversity with the Lactobacillus rhamnosus is just one example. There's many examples, but and we're learning more every day about how these microbes affect us. But for this particular example, I'm just talking about Lactobacillus rhamnosus and how that affects production of GABA, and how if you don't have that, it can increase symptoms of anxiety and depression. All right, next I'm going to talk about inflammation and how it can affect both the brain and the gut. So starting in the gut, if we have an imbalance of bacteria, which is called dysbiosis, just meaning imbalance of the bacteria, some bacteria produce a toxin called LPS, or lipopolysaccharide. That's just a component that's found in the cell wall of some bacteria. And if it's present in large amounts, then it can affect the small intestines and cause inflammation there. Creates immune response. It's the immune system sees it as foreign, attacks it, causes inflammation. That increases the permeability of the gut, which then means that LPS can get into the bloodstream, where it can then affect the brain because it can cross the blood-brain barrier as well. And it actually, when you have a leaky gut, it can later turn into this toxin, LPS, also getting into the brain. And it has been associated with disorders such as depression, dementia, and even schizophrenia. So just as some example of how it is that the gut and the brain are connected there with that inflammation and that dysbiosis that can happen so many different ways. Okay, so this is I'm just bringing up the red light therapy as a way to reduce systemic inflammation in the body. We have it at Whole Health Wellness Center. I recommend it for a variety of things, but if we know in our testing that you are inflamed, then I do recommend this sometimes for people because it's really excellent at bringing down inflammation. It's also really good for helping to improve mitochondrial function, which are the little energy centers of every cell that help produce ATP, which is the body's energy currency. It's how energy is utilized in the body. And so by improving that mitochondrial function, we're improving energy, we're improving cellular function, which has many cascading benefits. Usually people experience improved energy. There's certain settings that also help with the brain. It can be used really helpful for stress and depression, anxiety treatments as well. There's a question if it can help with neuropathy. It certainly can. It sort of depends on what is the cause of the neuropathy. If it's nerve damage, then possibly. Understanding where the neuropathy is coming from can help dictate the treatment course, but it's possible, yes. Here's just another schematic of showing how red light therapy works, essentially reducing inflammation. Just talking about the mitochondria again, how it activates the energy centers, creates ATP, and promotes more ATP, giving the body more energy, helping cell proliferation, the body's healing cycle, and then reducing inflammation. Laura has a comment about finding hard to find a diagnosis. So that's something that with different testing, we could try to figure out where it's coming from for sure. Yeah. All right, so short chain fatty acids. So this is another thing that are really important for gut and brain health. So where they come from actually is from certain kind of fibers called prebiotics that our body, we don't actually break it down, but the bacteria, the good commensal bacteria in our gut eat it. It's their food. And so they break down these prebiotic foods, and then it produces these short chain fatty acids, which actually feed the colonocytes or the cells of your colon, keeping them nice and healthy, keeping them from being leaky or permeable. Um, and so it's really important to have these short chain fatty acids, not only for keeping the gut healthy, but also they protect the brain, the blood brain barrier as well. So keeping those LPSs or that toxin from the bacteria from also getting into the brain. So I'm going to give you some examples of some prebiotics that you can include in your diet to help make these short chain fatty acids to keep your gut, the permeability of your gut nice, or keep your gut from getting permeable and keep it nice and healthy. So here are some prebiotic foods I listed. So there's kind of a wide range there. Some of these things you might be very familiar with, and some of them might be new, might be worth looking up. Jerusalem artichokes are what's pictured on the right. And I bring them up because most people don't know what they are, but they're very good. So they're a root tuber that when you bake them in the oven, they have a really nice nutty flavor, and they're a really great source of prebiotics. So if you don't know what they are, I really encourage you to check it out. And you can get them at the grocery store. Ask for them. If you don't know what they look like, there's a picture there, but you can ask for them and try that out to see. Yeah, yummy, nutty, and crunchy, says Lucia. Yeah, they're very good. So, and then garlic, onions, and leeks, asparagus. I just planted a bed of asparagus myself this spring. I'm excited to harvest them next year. Then chicory root, you probably might be familiar with that. It's sometimes used in teas more often, sometimes for like chocolate, you know, mixing it in for a chocolatey flavor or coffee alternatives. So yeah, and then dandelion greens. You can also buy these in the store. Be careful about getting them in your yard unless you know they haven't been sprayed with pesticides. Oats, barley, apples. So the other thing about apples is the pectin in apples is also really good for protecting the mucosa of the gut. They help produce a certain enzyme that helps make sure that the gut keeps it from becoming permeable. And then just in general, other root vegetables like beets, carrots, sweet potatoes, those are a pretty good source of prebiotics. Plantains, when they're not completely ripe, will have a lot of those prebiotics as well. And then probiotics. So probiotics meaning, most people are familiar with that word, but pro means for, and biotics, life. So pro-life. So they're promoting life in the body. They're helping that microbiome, the good, healthy bacteria. So I listed a few examples there. Most people do not eat these because they just have fallen out of favor in the American diet, but many places in the world they're part of everyday diet. So kefir would be an example of usually like a liquid that is a kind of a liquid yogurt. You can find non-dairy forms of it if that's a concern. Sauerkraut, of course, is a fermented cabbage. Tempeh is a fermented soy product. Natto is also a fermented soy product, has a very kind of gooey texture. It's kind of interesting. Kombucha is a good one, but you got to be a little bit careful with that one because it often has a lot of added sugar still. So like a 16-ounce bottle of kombucha usually has 16 grams of sugar, which is quite a lot. So you might just have that every once in a while or not drink the whole bottle. Miso is also a fermented soy product. It's really great for broths and soups. And then kimchi is the Korean mixture of cabbage and peppers, and it's kind of more spicy. It's nice to have with kind of Asian style food. But generally speaking, if eating this every day, but you don't have to eat a lot of it. It just has to be a tablespoon. So even if you just kind of have a little bit of it before you have your dinner, or with your dinner, if it works with your food, or whatever meal works for you, just finding ways to incorporate that. And the other thing that's important about probiotics is that make sure that they're fresh, that they're in the refrigerator section of the store, and usually it might say like live cultures on it. You don't want to get the things that have been canned. and aren't fresh. They don't have live cultures. And probiotics are not always appropriate for everyone, just because if you have an overgrowth, sometimes you have to kind of wait to correct that overgrowth before adding this. At least in terms of supplement form. As food, it might be more well tolerated, but generally speaking, it's a great idea. Right, so now I'm going to talk about some of the diagnostic testing that I do when I'm evaluating gut health. So there's a test I use through Genova Lab. It's a stool test. It's that will check actually looking at the microbiome. So it looks at the actual DNA of the bacteria that are present in your gut. So it's both looking for any possibility of infection or a bacteria that we know can cause an infection, as well as parasites. But it's also looking at the bacteria that we know that are good to see the diversity that's there. It looks at markers of inflammation to help us see if there's really a lot of inflammation there that might be contributing to systemic inflammation or indicative of some inflammatory bowel diseases. Also looks at pancreatic enzymes. I like this one because it gives us a sense of like how well your body is producing digestive enzymes and if you need to take some supplemental ones to kind of help with that. It's not uncommon for people's digestive enzyme levels to go down after age 35, but knowing about where you are can be helpful. Also, even look at the short chain fatty acids. So if you remember the short chain fatty acids that we talked about before, that's what your bacteria break down from those prebiotic foods like the Jerusalem artichokes and the dandelion greens. So if you're not eating a diet high in those prebiotics, your short chain fatty acids could be low. Or if you don't have the good bacteria that really digest those prebiotics, then it could also be the case that you don't have very much. And then we measure beta-glucuronidase, an enzyme that's made by these bacteria that helps us break down and eliminate excess estrogen from the body. And so if I see elevated levels of that, then oftentimes it helps to understand if there's estrogen dominance going on, and we can correct that. Another test I do is called the SIBO, small intestinal bacteria overgrowth breast test. So I usually do this one first if somebody's complaining of significant gas and bloating with abdominal distension. Like if somebody tells me every time I eat, I feel like I'm 6 months pregnant, I'm pretty sure that they have SIBO, but I like to do the test to just know what I'm dealing with so I can treat it the most appropriately and effectively. So this is another one that I use a fair amount when I'm evaluating people's gut health. And then here's just some other tests I do for helping understand like gut and brain health. So vitamin D, most people who live in the Northeast who don't take a supplement are low, or at least not optimally, their levels are not optimal in the Northeast just because we do not get the sun exposure for enough of the year and we don't get it in our diet. So and that can affect immune function as well as brain health quite a bit, and of course bone health with calcium because it helps with calcium absorption. So I definitely look at that and treat deficiencies. The other one would be B12 and folate. Those B12 and folate really important for nerve functioning, energy, metabolism, which can affect the brain as well. So I just like to make sure those levels are optimal. And then a full thyroid functioning panel. So a lot of times when you go to the doctor and they check your thyroid, they just look at the basic hormone TSH that comes from your brain to your thyroid, telling your thyroid to make thyroid hormone. But if they're not actually measuring the level of the thyroid hormone that you're making, then they're not really getting a true assessment of what is going on because there's many different steps that go into producing the actual hormone. So it's just important to measure and do a complete check and see what's going on with the thyroid, because if the functioning is too high or too low, it will affect metabolism as well as mood. So too low thyroid generally associated with things like dry skin, constipation, depression, difficulty losing weight. Too high can be things like racing heart, really fast metabolism, diarrhea, things like that. That one's not as common, but it is still possible to occur. And then I also screen for Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is an autoimmune condition where the body's immune system attacks the thyroid, just because it is a fairly common um, condition, especially in women over 30. So I like to just make sure that that's not going on. Next, I always like to see inflammation. The general marker of inflammation called C-reactive protein, or CRP, that I like to check because it just gives me a sense of overall, is there a lot of inflammation going on in the body? It doesn't tell me where it's coming from. It doesn't tell me why, but it just tells me there is in fact inflammation. So it's the first indicator that, there's something that's going on. Either the body is not resolving that inflammation, or there's just a lot going on. And so I try to figure out where it's coming from and treat that as well. And then food sensitivity testing. This helps guide a lot of times if you have a dysbiosis, if you have leaky gut, you can develop food sensitivities. Or if you just have innate food sensitivities, then you can develop dysbiosis and microbiome imbalances. So I like to test for this if a person doesn't want to do kind of like an elimination diet where you take out certain foods for a period of time and then reintroduce them. It can kind of help guide that process. The most common food sensitivities are gluten, dairy, eggs, soy, sometimes nightshades. Those can all be eggs. I don't think I said that one. Those can all be pretty common food sensitivities. So this can help us narrow it down. So there's that. And then sometimes I will, if somebody is telling me about some exposures to mold or heavy metals, or they just want, or we can't figure out where their issues are coming from, then I dig a little deeper with these other testing where I look to see, is there lead, mercury, cadmium, all these things that can affect brain function. And then mold also can be is a toxin to a certain degree to everybody, but some people are particularly sensitive to it. And then also if they've had a lot of exposure. All right, so now I'm going to shift into just kind of talking about understanding the different types of brains that there are and how they function. So there's a psychiatrist, Daniel Amen, who has done over 200,000 SPECT scans of people's brains. So it's a kind of functional MRI that looks at the activation of the brain. So it's not just looking at the structure of the brain like a typical MRI, it's also looking at like what parts of the brain are most active. And that can help us understand, because each part of the brain has different functions. So when there's deficiencies or more activation in certain parts of the brain, it can help target and understanding what's going on so that treatment can be more personalized. But he's, over his years of experience, he recently wrote this book, You Happier, that I recommend. It's a good read. It has a lot of suggestions of things to do along the lines of personalized brain, but just overall understanding things you can do to help support your brain health. I'm just going to kind of summarize a little bit of the brain types that he discussed, just to understand kind of, maybe you can look through and decide what you think you might be. So, oh, what just happened? Hold on a second. Oh, there we go. Okay, so the first one I'm going to talk about is the spontaneous brain. So this is one where the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that's like right in front of your forehead, it doesn't develop fully until around age 26. But it is the part of the brain that when that part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, is less engaged or less active, we tend to have these traits of spontaneity, increased risk taking. Sound familiar to like some like, kind of similar to what you think of like a teenager whose prefrontal cortex isn't completely developed, they might be more prone to risk taking, that kind of stuff, but also more creativity, curiosity, might have kind of lots of different interests going kind of all over the place. Kind of a tendency to ADD or attention deficit disorder doesn't mean they have it. It just has those tendencies that are similar, more, interested in lots of things, kind of difficult to sit still, kind of having you know restlessness. So some of those traits there. So maybe you relate to that to some degree, or somebody who is kind of like that. So if that's the case, there's certain things you can do to support that brain type, and mostly it has to do with dopamine. So dopamine is a neurotransmitter of it kind of is like kind of known as the neurotransmitter of reward, because whenever we do something that's positive, we get a little bit of dopamine. It gets reinforced. Okay, so there's certain amino acids like L-tyrosine that helps the production of dopamine. L-theanine is just kind of calming to the brain, and then ashwagandha and ginseng also can be helpful. Rhodiola is another herb. High protein, low carb diets, massage, meditation, and making sure you get enough exposure to sunlight. Or in the winter, using some of those SAD lamps can be really helpful, and which are, they have a certain light spectrum. And then regular exercise. All of those things help to support dopamine, which can be helpful for everyone, but in particular, particularly helpful for the spontaneous brain type. The next one is persistent brain. So, persistent meaning the brain is has more tendency to have persistence in what they're doing, maybe focus, difficulty to change from one thing to another, strong will, preference to routine, maybe have certain thoughts that they kind of stick in their brain and won't go away, tendency to hold on to things like having resentment or grudges, tendency to see what's wrong, maybe some tendencies for obsessive compulsive disorder or tendencies. So if that's the case, then you really want to support serotonin. And so tryptophan is an amino acid that can be found in those foods that I've listed there. It's a precursor to serotonin, so making sure you're getting enough tryptophan will mean you're getting more serotonin. Other things that support serotonin are omega-3 fatty acids. Saffron is a really great one. It's really great for serotonin production. 5-HTP, again, a precursor to serotonin. Need to be careful with some of these. If you're on an antidepressant or an SSRI, serotonin levels that's supporting serotonin levels, so you don't want to overdo it. So St. John's wort, same thing, helps support serotonin levels, so you have to be careful if you're taking an antidepressant. But then some other nutrients, vitamin D and B6, B12, magnesium, curcumin. Gratitude practices help produce serotonin, and then using the light box, like I was just describing, the SAD lamp, especially in the morning. All right, the next one is a cautious brain. So you can see there, risk aversion, tend to be maybe shy, difficulty relaxing, kind of more prone to anxiety. So that one is GABA. So if you remember back when I was talking about GABA being the neurotransmitter that really supports relaxation or calming effect on the brain. So we want to make sure that we have a lot of GABA support. So of course that means things avoiding depleting GABA. So things that deplete GABA: caffeine, nicotine, alcohol, stress. Makes sense. Lemon balm is an herb that can be really helpful for supporting GABA, as well as L-theanine, magnesium, taurine, passion flower, valerian. Some of these are often formulated in one together, in a supplement together, because they have a calming effect. And then certain probiotics, they're lactobacillus, brevis, lactis, and I think I meant to say rhamnosus there, not rhamnosus. And then B6 and Tai Chi. All right, sensitive brain. This is the last one. This one is, people who are sensitive, both to all kinds of stimulus, whether they are environmental, like noises, bright lights, but also have deep feelings, tendency towards empathy, feeling emotion really strongly, can have more mood variability just because they're they kind of have a tendency to be more reactive to different stimulus. They also have a tendency to maybe pessimism, which can then turn into a tendency towards depression. And they have a lot of what are called ANTs, or autonomic negative thoughts. I didn't make that up. That's a term people use, where you feel like you keep getting these thoughts over and over in your brain. Those are called automatic negative thoughts. And some people with this kind of brain type tend to have those more than others. So sensitive brain, they basically need all the neurotransmitter support. So I wrote down here at the bottom, they need serotonin and dopamine. So you have to kind of think back, what were those dopamine supports? What were the serotonin supports? Those are great. But also oxytocin is a neurotransmitter associated with, actually it's a hormone, sorry, but it's associated with, the bonding hormone, or helps us with it's a feeling of safety, social connectedness. So anything you do with that encourages that. So massage, having a pet, physical intimacy, specifically loving kindness meditations. Those all are going to support oxytocin. And then endorphins. Those help us with pain management. So things like dark chocolate can be really helpful for endorphin support. Laughing, acupuncture, and exercise. So, and then also there's a brain type that's called, balanced, where you are a kind of a component where all of these things are in line, and your, clarity of thought, dependability, not a lot of emotional variation, or have emotional variations but not big highs and lows. That's another kind of brain type that you kind of is a healthy brain. So these other ones can be healthy. You just have to kind of support them in ways to kind of support the weaknesses that each of them have, and emphasize the strengths that each have. All right. So now I'm going to talk about just some other lifestyle things in a little more detail to help with brain health. I mentioned gratitude in a couple of the brain types, but it can be a really powerful thing to do as a practice. So, the idea of gratitude is great, but when you start to actually do it as a practice and have exercises that you do on a regular basis, it can really improve brain health and just the way you feel and your mood. So what do I mean by having a gratitude practice? So there's different ways of doing this. Having a gratitude journal where you actually write down things you're grateful for on a regular basis, even if it's just like every day I write down 5 things that happened that were made me happy or made me smile, or that I'm grateful for. Or even better, I really like to share this with somebody. So writing it down is great, but also talking about it to somebody else. It brings a positivity to an interaction with somebody that you have. It makes an intention around being grateful and expressing gratitude and focusing on positive things with somebody that you love, whether that's a partner, a family member, friend. Can be a really great thing to do on a regular basis with somebody. And then also just recognizing moments throughout the day when they're happening, and taking a moment to pause and really soak it in. And one way that Brene Brown talks about this in one of her books is having a picture memory. where, you know, if you have the impulse to take a picture because something's really beautiful and you want to capture it, actually taking a moment to let that sink into your body, remembering how you feel, what does it smell like, what does it sound like, you know, really embodying that experience. And that gets put into the brain, into the long term memory when we really take a moment to pause and have those savoring moments of gratitude within the day. Okay, so on the other side of that, avoiding information overload. So we live in a time where we have stuff coming at us all the time from so many different sources, and some of the media sources are not as positive as others. So it's really easy to get overwhelmed because we know about every single bad thing that's happening all over the world when we listen to the news all the time, right? So putting limits on that, and also balancing it with positive things, and then also just limiting the amount of time that you're available to answer emails, texts, etc., can help prevent that information overload that can contribute to negative mood and be really taxing on the brain. Acupuncture is a really great one for stress management. I really like this one for people, especially, um, well, anybody, but especially people who are prone to anxiety or have problems sleeping. It can be really great to really help reset the nervous system and rebalance some of that. Really helpful and effective. Yeah, and then just in, you know, I mentioned chronic inflammation, various points in this talk. So this is just addressing that, you know, getting anti-inflammatory, high oxidative or antioxidant diets from eating colorful foods is so important for brain health. Eating a good diet um, can help your body quite a lot. So, an organic is best because it's going to reduce your exposure to harmful chemicals that take up a lot of your body's resources in terms of nutrients and to detoxify from those. So the more you can fuel your body with things that are going to not deplete you, the better. And then another anti-inflammatory supplement that's really great for brain health. I think everyone should be either eating fish a few times a week, or taking a supplement of omega-3s. In terms of eating fish, I recommend avoiding large fish, that like swordfish, tuna sometimes. Well, tuna is large. It can have mercury, so being careful about that. Smaller fish like sardines, mackerel, wild caught salmon is a great source of omega-3s. All right, so that brings us to the end. So here I'm just talking about how if you are interested in anything I said, or you have some questions about some of the testing I talked about, and you just want to know a little bit more about naturopathic medicine, then you can book a free call to talk about that. If you already know about naturopathic medicine, you feel confident that you want to set up an appointment, then you can skip this step and just go straight to making an appointment, whatever works best for you. Would love to talk to you more and see about any of these things that we can do to help you feel your best and really keep your brain and your gut healthy so that you can live life to the fullest. Oh yeah, and just so you know a little more information about the consultation, we can do it in person or virtually, like telehealth. I personally like to do the first visit in person if that's possible, but virtual is always an option. Insurance that we accept there is listed there. And the first visit is an hour long to give me plenty of time to complete a complete history and come up with a comprehensive plan to address all your concerns. So I hope this was a helpful webinar. I hope you learned at least a couple new things, or maybe you chose one or two things that your actionable thing you're going to start doing, whether it's the breathing exercises, or eating more fish. I hope that this was helpful and that you can take something away from it, or maybe you decided that you're really interested in putting your brain health and your gut health first and making an appointment with me to talk more about that. So thank you so much for attending tonight. I hope you have a good rest of your evening, and that everybody take care. I'm reading your comments. Thank you so much I'm glad that you guys found this useful and informative. Are there any questions? I can answer any questions too. If there's any last minute questions that people had, I'll give a moment for that. All right, looks like I'm not seeing any questions. So thanks so much for joining me tonight, and I hope you have a nice, relaxing, restful evening. Do something fun or laugh at something. I like to watch dog videos. Okay, good night.